Hello, Lee.
Hi.
How are you? How is it going today?
Yeah, not too bad.
Not
It's
too bad.
sunny here. It's sunny. That's
Yeah,
always good.
good. Sunny for Dutch weather is
Yeah, exactly.
like heaven, right?
We'll take it. Yeah, exactly. Always take it.
Okay, great. So, thank you for accepting my invitation to be in this podcast, Lee.
No problem.
Very much appreciated. First of all, let me introduce you with people that are not familiar with my English podcast. Generally, I
Sure.
do in Turkish, but you will be my first English podcast guest. So everybody's thrilled here. Everybody's excited.
Good.
Lee is one of the founders of Wrangu, which is a privacy program, privacy software using ServiceNow platform data infrastructure and allows privacy professionals to manage their privacy subjects smoother and faster and much, much easier than regular ways. And just Lee, please tell us about your background. How did you end up with Wrangu?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I knew nothing about ServiceNow until about 5 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time, I was running a large outsourcer in an investment bank, and we had a lot of risk to manage at the time. And I was losing about 5% of my staff to managing risk. And at the same time, there was no transparency created. It was all on spreadsheets and Word documents and physical documents, which meant that it was very inefficient. And basically, I couldn't see anything. I couldn't understand what was going on. And it was costing the department a lot of money. And at the same time, my wife started working for this company called ServiceNow. And I looked over her shoulder and thought, wow, this could really, really make a difference to the issues I was having, if you like, in that world. So I decided to stop and figure out a way to do business there, and found my co-founders who were technical people. I'm commercial, and we put our heads together and came up with a company which is Wrangu, which is intended to solve for privacy and risk effectively using the ServiceNow platform.
Great. So the risks and the privacy challenges were your main driving force behind
Absolutely.
this idea.
Yeah,
Behind this idea.
absolutely.
So you tried to come up with a more flexible solution, right?
Yeah, I mean the real strength of the ServiceNow platform is the flexibility. That's why we built our solution on it. We personally don't feel that one size fits all in any organization, and we want to make sure that the clients that we've got receive a solution that actually fits their business rather than makes them change their business, and therefore it helps support digital transformation much more tightly in our opinion. And that was the whole driver for building on ServiceNow, was to create that flexibility.
I certainly agree on this because one of the things that I see in many organizations is that generally software solutions are trying to enforce their one size fits all
Right.
agenda,
Right.
but it just doesn't work everywhere.
No, that's it. And I think, the difficulty is, I think the maturity of this marketplace is, we're in early days, if you like, of the privacy world.
Exactly.
And a lot of people in different companies are looking for advice on what they should be doing and how it should work. And a lot of the companies that we would consider our competitors will go in and tell them what to do based on the product they've got, the product they're selling, and justify it. Whereas we would rather go in and try and understand exactly what they're trying to achieve, what the constraints of the business are. Every business is different. Everybody's attitude to risk is different. Everybody has different views, even legal ones, and I'm sure you've come across many legal views as well. So we just don't believe one size fits all, and we want to make sure that the customers really get what they want.
That's a great approach. The approach is trying to tackle the problems in the privacy side, and it's very much GDPR focused. So I would like to ask you some of the questions that comes up to my mind about GDPR, because I know that you are working in this field and mainly European continent.
That's right.
Where GDPR applies. But I know that you are expanding. But let's focus on GDPR first.
Yep.
Due to your experiences with companies in different countries in the continent, what are the challenges do the companies let's say, data controllers face when it comes to implementing GDPR and complying with this law?
Yeah, okay. I think one of the things that stands out to start with is GDPR, when it first came in, wasn't really particularly prescriptive. It didn't say, here's exactly the box that you need to tick, which meant that people had to figure out for themselves exactly what a legislation meant, which meant talking to lawyers, which meant figuring out with IT people and trying to figure out exactly what I need to do to be compliant if I'm a DPO. And actually what I think that ended up doing was putting a lot of pressure on DPOs, many of whom were in their first role as a DPO, because the DPO didn't exist until not long ago, although many come from data privacy background. And I think that created the sort of lack of solidity in the backdrop and meant it was extremely inefficient in terms of how you were working with your providers. They weren't quite sure what to do. The way that privacy is managed in many companies, most companies, is you have a very small team or even one person centrally, and then you rely on them influencing other people in their organization, which is very, very difficult to do. As you know, if you imagine you're in a 100,000 person organization and you need to influence 300 of them to do some work for you.
Crazy.
Yeah, really, really inefficient. And even then, have you actually got transparency? Because so much is done on email or spreadsheets or things that aren't live and real. So ultimately, those are the sort of challenges that that our customers were facing when we first started having these conversations with them 4 years ago.
Actually, you said GDPR was not that prescriptive when it just first came out. Actually, it didn't change at all. But due to the guidances, due to the other regulative actions, now it's much more clear.
It is.
I know.
Yeah.
It is much more clear for everybody. But when we come to Turkey, we say GDPR is much more prescriptive than the Turkish privacy law. So
Okay.
You can't imagine what we've been through all this time.
So you need our flexibility.
Exactly. That's how I actually came out with you and your team, because generally what I thought about the Turkish market was pretty much the same regarding your point of view to the GDPR world, because the same thing applies in, I think, all around the world. Privacy laws are not that strict, prescriptive. They're ambiguous in some ways. So that's why they need a kind of like a professional support, either from the consultancy side or the software side. It doesn't matter, but it generally needs and definitely needs the support. What I can say is you are as a supportive side to the GDPR implementation, privacy laws, which have really high fines. And so what we can say is, as a solution provider, what were your thoughts on the GDPR and its implementation?
Well, I think one of the biggest challenges we've had is the lack of enforcement of some of the rules in GDPR. And that's not because I want companies to get fines necessarily, but that lack of enforcement means that there's question marks in companies' mind. How much do I actually go down this route? How much do I buy into privacy by design and invest in it if actually nobody's going to enforce it? And that lack of enforcement, I think, means that there's a lack of clarity. There is some improvements. There are countries that are starting to at least try to articulate what is right and what is wrong and what will potentially lead to a fine and what won't. But it's still few and far between. I think it would be great to understand really from the regulators exactly what is what for companies. I mean, because at the moment you get different companies. Some will try and follow it exactly, literally to the letter and try and tick every single box. Some will play the risk reward game. How much do I really need to spend? If I get fined, is it really going to be that much? So you really have got the in between, and that's kind of missing the point behind the regulation, which was to protect individuals' privacy, right? Ultimately, it wasn't about a return on investment for a company, but that lack of enforcement and the lack of fines, I think, is really leaving an open door for companies who decide to just take the risk.
100% agree with you. But at the same time, we see some, the name of our show is gray areas.
Mm-hmm.
So we see a lot of gray areas
Yeah.
due to this
Yeah.
lack of clarity and lack of enforcement. Because in the end, there is not the parliaments or the legislative bodies
Yeah.
that govern this law. This is the data protection authorities.
Mm-hmm.
So they have to lead the way.
Yeah.
So they have to show us the way how this will go. And sometimes, yeah, we can see that there's a difference between the understanding of the law in different countries. For example, sometimes we see that in countries like France, Spain, they regulate and they enforce fines to some certain, let's say, businesses,
Yeah.
like telcos.
Yeah.
For example, in Spain, telcos are the bad guys. They fine telcos like crazy. I think the structure will be better in the future once we have some sort of when we come to a median,
Yeah.
In average in this case.
Yeah, and you see quite a lot of you just pointed it out. You see quite a lot of difference from the different countries within the EU as well. We work across many different countries. I think we're in 9 different countries now with clients, and you've got everything from very structured and very clear data protection authorities that are really trying to set the standard, and then you've got others that aren't at all. You've got some that are trying to help with simple tools and tests, and others that don't do it. So it's very difficult, I think, to work across Europe, and we find our customers are very different by geography.
I can add something like, for example, did you know that the first fine that was issued in Italy was against one of the governing parties?
No, I didn't know
Of
that, but
Italy.
that makes sense.
Yes. So, like different DPAs have different approaches. So you can see that by their decisions. I think it will be much clearer in the future. But your services, the software side, will always, I think, have a strong hand in this case because, as you said, it's not a one man's job.
Yeah.
So, from your experience, do you believe that one country is tougher than the others? Like, what do you think? Regulation and enforcement wise.
Well, no, really. I mean, I go back to what I said earlier. I think that lack of enforcement is everywhere. We do see very different behaviours, as I alluded to earlier. In the Nordic countries, for example, they seem to be a lot more advanced in their approach to literally privacy by design. So taking the whole organisation on the journey, and if you go sort of the further south you go, the less structured it becomes in that sense through Europe. The Nordic countries are definitely very advanced for us. Just behind that is sort of the Benelux region, and Germany's always had a very strong data protection law, but it's different from GDPR. So they're kind of learning. We saw their difference in Germany because the first thought was, well, everything in GDPR we cover anyway, much more stringently, but actually when they got into it, there's some big gaps between the two, and that's been quite an interesting journey. So I think overall everybody's different country by country. I think the data protection authorities are behaving very differently as well, as you said. It does help though, a bit like normal law, and that's your background, but there's a law written down, and the more cases there are and the more examples that are set, the more it clarifies the specific point of law. And I think we get that more and more across all countries at the moment, which is a good thing, but it's probably not fast enough. I wouldn't say the Netherlands is a tougher country on it, or Ireland, or wherever, from our experience anyway, but we do see different behaviors based on those.
So I put GDPR in the center because it's like a global influence now in terms of privacy. I will go into another question, and as a global influence, this GDPR influence, do you think that it will continue in the future, and we will see other regulations that relate to GDPR or as a subject, data protection and privacy, spread on a wider scale?
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's amazing what GDPR has done, because most of the privacy regulations in the world have used that as the basis for what they're doing. LPPD is an obvious one recently. I'm sure you saw in Brazil, where they moved the Privacy Act into law very quickly overnight. But that's pretty much based on GDPR. When you go through it, there are very few differences.
It's very similar.
Yeah, very similar. A few different words, a few different phrases, but actually the meaning is pretty similar. And we see that everywhere, as people are talking about new legislation. I think the bottom line is privacy is not going away. People are much more aware of privacy now, and becoming more so every day. They didn't start to care about it until recently, but if you look at the situation with COVID, and you look at all the different apps, for example, they're all over the world, issued by the government in a lot of cases, and yet the requirements as they relate to people's individual privacy and the sensitive data that they're actually collecting, because it's not just normal data, it's sensitive data, is open to question how that's going to be used, going forward. So for me, that's got people starting to think, oh, well, where is this information going? What are you doing? So it's just the next step, that awareness of actually that is my data. And what people are also starting to realize, because it's being put in the press, is data is genuinely the new gold. Data is worth a huge amount of money, and I don't think people realized how much they were being targeted, for want of a better word, through use of their own data. It still amazes me that I can be walking down the street and talking to somebody about a car that drives past, isn't that a nice Mini or whatever, and the next time I log onto a website, I get an advert for a Mini, right? That is
insane, right?
It is insane, absolutely nuts, and it still makes me just jaw drop. So
that is one of the biggest questions that I receive when I go to consultancy sessions.
Yeah,
that like the general, everybody's sitting on a table, and Mr. Burak, so there's a privacy law. So tell us about this. I tell you something about this car and blah blah, and I receive an ad about it. How would you respond to that? Something like, I am representing that social media company. I don't, but it's crazy.
It is crazy.
It's happening.
It is, and I think people are starting to realize now it's not a coincidence. One way or another, through your telephone or through your computer or through whatever it is that's switched on, there's a lot of data being collected about you. And some of it's good. Some sites I would go on to, I'd say, well, actually, I don't mind them telling me things that they want to know, but I should have a choice. It shouldn't be taken away from me, the choice. And for me, that's the fundamental point behind GDPR. And I think more and more people are starting to think that. Even my parents have noticed that they're getting ads targeted, and they're in their 70s. So, if people are starting to become much more aware in that sense, it's definitely not going away soon. And I think GDPR was the first legislation that tried to standardize, if you like, and create unity across multiple countries in a very structured way. I was going to say clear, but a lot of it wasn't clear, but structured way.
Structure is a better word.
Yeah, I think structured will win. But I think and then it makes sense for other places in the world as well to use that as their basis too.
Great. So you are active in many countries, and you have, I think, in other continents as well. So what do you think, like how they address their privacy regulations in different countries? Like how seriously do these countries take it?
Yeah, I think it relates a little bit to what I mentioned earlier. The different countries seem to have a different approach. So we've recently gone into the US as well, where
Great.
They potentially have GDPR.
Very different approach.
Really different. And state by state, they're putting in almost specific regulations rather than the wider GDPR regulation. Although some are starting to look like GDPR as they go through. But their enforcement there is slightly different because it's such a litigious society. If there is a regulation and it's broken, then it's very rare that people would just ignore it. You know, there will be lawsuits, and in a way, that's a good thing. That's what I was saying was missing from Europe, is that enforcement, even if it's by private individuals, can really make a difference. And I thought that I'm not a lawyer, but I was reading in Brazil with the LGPD, where it's been enacted, but nobody will be fined. They've said for a period of time, say up to a year. But as an individual there, now that it's come into law, they can individually sue anybody who misuses their data. And you think about that's quite cool, because it gives the power back to the individual to start to create some sort of enforcement if the authorities aren't doing it. And I think that's the sort of thing that would be, in a way, would be great to have in Europe too. So, I mean, difference in behavior, yeah, they take it much more seriously in the States. The US companies, they didn't take GDPR as seriously as I expected. I think their understanding of whether it applies to them or not when they're selling goods into Europe or hiring people or using people in Europe was not as strong. Still probably isn't as strong, some of the companies we meet. But from a local perspective, a local US legislation, they do seem to take that quite seriously, which is good.
Generally, you said driving force are expected to be the individuals, and same in Turkey, by the way. In Turkey, the main driving force of the enforcements are people.
I think that's good.
Turkish people. So the awareness level, I can see that the awareness level is increasing every day, and we are receiving some complaints about things which we either from the client side or the individual side. Yeah, as you said, as you mentioned, privacy is here to stay, and we will expect more from the organizations for compliance. But there is a presence of DPO in the center in GDPR. If you are in certain levels, you have to employ or outsource a DPO. Right. So a presence of a DPO, in some cases, I saw that we employed a DPO, so we are in comply with the law. Yeah. Nothing is no problem. Yeah. But it's not the case. So the DPOs have to also engage a certain compliance, the data controller side or the processor side. So do you think DPO's presence is sufficient for compliance? If not, what do you suggest to these DPOs?
No, I don't think it's sufficient. And actually, I feel a little bit sorry for DPOs, because I think a lot of companies have done exactly what you said, and they've hired one individual and said, okay, now I'm done. You know, and
Superman.
Yeah, exactly. And that just doesn't work. Even when we've seen a decent size DPO office, you know, maybe 10 people are there in a 100,000, 200,000 person company. You can't just do it as a DPO. You know, the fundamental is you need to translate the privacy requirements into the DNA of the company. It has to change. You know, the principle of the privacy by design is the one that I hang on to all the time, because that's the fundamental. You know, as long as you understand that, then you'll always get it right, as long as you comply with it. And I think, you know, the expectation is that a DPO can just figure it out for themselves. And you've got all these different business units that you're having to deal with in a lot of certainly major companies that all also, by the way, have their own priorities on, you know, what they need to do next, their own targets from a revenue perspective, etc. And for me, you know, the DPO on their own doesn't work. I think where you've got really strong board backing and they accept that actually, you know, there is a requirement to do this genuinely. We need to transition our company to, you know.
It's very, very important. That board backing you mentioned is incredibly important.
Exactly. Because, you know, just saying, well, here's a budget for 2 people and a system is not going to change the organization fundamentally. You know, it might help give you a little bit more transparency. It might, you know, maybe protect you somewhere, but you're not actually complying with what really was intended, which is that privacy of individuals' rights need to be respected by companies. And we've seen the difference when we do see companies that do have strong board support, and I'm sure you've seen this too. There's a massive difference in how a DPO can operate and how effective they can be in an organization. Where you don't get it, it's much more difficult, and everything becomes a battle to try and push through what should be fundamental.
Yeah. I certainly agree. Do you have any tips for that individuals or that data controllers, processors on compliance? Like how should they, what should they follow?
Yeah, we've actually, on our website, there's actually an ebook with top 10, but one of the fundamentals is understanding where your data actually is in your organization. What it's being used for, is it really required? One of the biggest things we see is a lot of data being held that has no justification at all.
Yeah. Data minimization, that's number one priority.
Exactly. I think there's an element of understanding about your third parties and how much you're using third parties, and whether you have the right agreements in place with them, and actually whether you believe that they're behaving properly, as well as just having the right agreements in place. I think the two things go together. So some of these things, putting a DPO in place is good because you need to have the processes, right, and understand what needs to be done. For me, if you read our top 10 tips ebook, it'll all look fairly simple. It actually, you read through it and it's not rocket science. It's pretty much common sense. And just going through it one step at a time is the main thing. But the biggest thing we see, and the biggest tip that I would give to any company, is understanding where your data is, understanding where it should be, where you have the right to actually hold that data, so that you actually have some semblance of control over what's going on within the business. Because if you haven't got that, it doesn't really matter about the rest of it. Having a data processing agreement with a third party is great, but if you've got data all over the place that's being leaked out to somebody you haven't got an agreement with, then that one agreement doesn't help.
I definitely agree. Just follow the data lifecycle, right?
Exactly.
Where does it come from? How should we manage it? And when should we delete it or erase it? Whatever.
Exactly.
According to its needs. Wrangu actually helps to achieve that goal, right?
Absolutely.
This is the main. This is the main target. This is the main KPI. So tell us about some customer story that you helped and achieved that goal.
Sure. One of the ones that we like to talk about, because it actually solves for some of the problems we talked about earlier, is a company called Rema in the Nordics, Norway, retail company, having a lot of DSRs coming in, as you might imagine, from retailer. And they estimated roughly that it was taking about 8 hours per DSR in terms of work time, obviously not response time. But if you start multiplying that up by a lot of DSRs, you get to a huge requirement.
Just wait a second here, because for the listeners who are not familiar with the GDPR terminology, I would like to say that DSR is data subject rights, which is the rights given in the GDPR, which is pretty much similar with the Turkish law. So please continue now.
Okay, sorry. 3-letter acronyms pop up all over the place.
No, it's fine. It's fine. I just wanted to elaborate.
Sure. So, they effectively looked at it and said, there's got to be a better way. We sold to them through our partner in the Nordics, a company called Soprasteria. And what they did is they used our Privacy Hub product at the center of the solution, and they actually integrated it with their shopping app, so that an individual who had a shopping app with the company could actually press, I would like to see my data, I would like to delete my data, etc. And they automated the process right the way through to the back end. So from that request to the back end, and you receive your DSR literally within seconds on your phone, on the app, which gets you around the authentication. And they reckon it saved them over 8 hours per DSR, because it became instant and touchless. And that equated to over $250,000 a quarter. So going back to what we said was some of the challenges that we set out to try and solve way back at the beginning. The transparency, providing transparency of their data to those individuals is really important. But the efficiency as well, doing that in a way that actually is sustainable for a company, rather than a way that just isn't sustainable. And they did a great job. I think it saved them time, saved them money, and also gave them credibility in the sense of they truly respected individuals' rights to know their data that was being held and to provide it to them, change it, delete it, etc.
So what you said just increased my excitement because you said that you embedded it into the app.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yeah, effectively we became part of the chain. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, perfect. Because that's really one of the challenges. Generally, these kind of services try to solve the problem individually.
Yeah.
They don't become part of the system.
Yeah.
So that they're not modular.
Yeah.
I think Wrangu is advanced in the sense technique-wise, it's advanced among its competitors. It's a great pleasure to have this podcast with you. Do you have any questions for us and for the Turkish listeners?
Yeah, I get a key one. We've partnered with you, Barak, to try and bring privacy management solutions to Turkey. What are the experiences and the expectations of the Turkish market, do you think, for as it relates to privacy solutions?
Actually, a Norwegian company can be implemented in the same manner with the Turkish companies, Turkish data controllers, because what I saw in the market is generally the companies already have their own systems, so they don't want to have one size fits all solutions and want to do the POC for a different program as well. But instead, they want to find modular solutions that can be embedded to their own existing ones. So when I say Wrangu, I think I see a very bright future in Turkey because there is no solution that will be doing that. And also at the same time, we will try to employ our experience in the market to Wrangu's solutions. So I think that will be a really good fit. We are very excited about it.
Yeah, perfect. I think for me, the combination of your legal expertise and understanding of the market and our systems that can fit the requirements that customers have is really, really strong. I like to call it privacy power. I think it's
great.
It's a
great.
game
Catchy
changer.
Name.
Yeah, it's a game changer. And I think it supports, every company's on a journey, and what you just said is fundamental, and that's why we work together, is understanding what the customer really wants and trying to fit a solution into their business that works for them, rather than have them change their business around one component. There's so many other things going on in digital transformation at the moment, and being able to be an active part of that rather than, a square peg that only fits a square hole. We can change, we can be round if needs be, and that makes a big difference, I think.
Exactly. And also this is the same mentality that we employ in OD privacy. We are very much client first consultancy company. So we don't try to enforce some certain way of consultancy, but instead we try to understand the client's needs, and that's how we cater like a, let's say, bespoke solution to that. And I think Wrangu will fit perfectly into this bespoke attitude. Let's see how will it go.
Yeah, looking forward to it.
Yeah, thank you for sharing your insights about your expertise and accepting our offer to be in this podcast.
No problem. A pleasure.
It was a pleasure to have you here. Hoping to do it again.
Anytime.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marek. Appreciate it.
Have a great one.
Thank you.